Hello, my name is Stephen Bainbridge, and I'm the William Warren Professor at the UCLA School of Law. My latest book is entitled The Profit Motive, and it's a defense of shareholder value maximization as the social purpose of the corporation. As such, it's a critique and an argument against current ideas about corporate social responsibility, ESG, stakeholder capitalism, the idea that the purpose of the corporation is not simply to increase its value for the shareholders, but in some way to take care of all of the various stakeholders that have an interest in the corporation. Now, I can't boil a 300-page book down into a 15-minute set of sound bites very easily. But what I can do is to offer you three basic bullet points. The first point I'd like to make is that stakeholder capitalism, or ESG, or corporate social responsibility, or whatever else you want to call it, simply can't work. Shareholder value maximization is easy for managers to implement. It asks one rather simple question. Is the company profitable? Are its profits increasing? Is the share price going up? Are new customers being obtained on a profitable basis? All of which are really ways of phrasing that basic question. Are the directors and managers increasing shareholder value or not? And you can use very basic metrics of valuation to make that determination. In contrast, stakeholder capitalism has too many metrics. Now, in theory, it's very difficult for a decision maker to maximize more than one or two or three objectives at the same time. And the problem is that ESG, stakeholder capitalism, asks decision makers to simultaneously take into account and to maximize an enormous number of factors. This slide is terrible PowerPoint because you're going to have a lot of trouble reading the font in the diagram. But that's intended to make my point. If you add up all of the metrics that come from this paper on ESG, the authors recommend a total of 79 metrics for directors to consider when they're making corporate decisions. And the problem is that humans with bounded rationality, with limits on information, with limits on time constraints, simply can't do that. They simply can't simultaneously juggle 79 balls in their decision-making process. And if that's right, and I think our own experiences will teach us that, but if that's right, what is a decision maker likely to do? And therein lies the problem, which is that stakeholder capitalism fundamentally lacks accountability. Let us imagine that Acme Company board of directors is considering closing down an obsolete plant. And the board's been advised that closing the plant will cost many longtime employees their jobs. It will harm the community in which the plant operates because job loss, lower taxes, etc. It'll have a significant impact on the local community. On the other hand, building a new plant in a lower cost location will benefit the people that are hired to work at that new plant. It'll benefit that community where the new plant's built. And so there will be both costs and benefits. How should the board weigh that? Well, under shareholder value maximization, the board has a very simple task. Which of these choices would maximize shareholder value? Under ESG, or stakeholder capitalism, the board needs to take into account the impact on the old community, the impact on the new community, the impact on the old employees, the impact on the new employees, the impact on the environment, the impact on society in general, so forth and so on. And what's a board possibly going to do here? Well, suppose you're a director and you're thinking about this problem, and the thought occurs to you, well, what's in my interest? What would be the best decision for me? And suppose that you conclude that your interests side with those of the employees at the present plant. And so you and your fellow directors announce that you're going to keep the plant open. See, the problem is, under the stakeholder paradigm, almost any management expenditure of corporate resources, short of outright fraud or theft, of course, but almost any management expenditure of corporate resources can be justified as being consistent with addressing the priorities of some stakeholder group. By keeping the old plant open, we're benefiting our employees. We're taking care of that local community where we have long-standing ties. And yes, our shareholders will make a little less money, but we're making a trade-off between the interests of our shareholders and the interests of our stakeholders. But suppose you and your fellow directors conclude that it's not keeping the old plant open that's in your best interest. Suppose you conclude that building the new plant is in your personal best interest. So now you decide, okay, let's build the new plant. And you justify that by saying, oh, we are really sorry about the impact on our employees. And we are really sorry about the impact on that local community. But we have to do what's good for the shareholders. And moreover, we're excited about the opportunities to develop a new workforce in this community. We're excited about developing ties and relationships at this new community. We think we can make a very positive impact on this new community. We think the new plant will be economically and environmentally more efficient. We think we can reduce our carbon footprint by having a new state-of-the-art facility. And so, on balance, considering all of the stakeholders, considering the environmental, social, governance factors, we think the socially responsible thing for us to do is to close the old plant and build the new plant. And so you see what ESG, stakeholder capitalism, corporate social responsibility do is essentially to permit the board to juggle so many factors that they are always going to be able to do so in a way that justifies a self-interested decision. Now, there's been a lot of talk in recent years by corporate executives that they are embracing stakeholder capitalism. In the United States in 2019, for example, the Business Roundtable, which is an organization of CEOs of 200 large companies, put out a statement in which, for the very first time, they embraced the idea that shareholder capitalism was no longer the purpose of the corporation, that the purpose of the corporation was stakeholder capitalism. They embraced ESG. Well, have they lived up to that? Or are they using ESG, stakeholder capitalism, as a smokescreen for business as usual? Are they using ESG, stakeholder capitalism, for example, to mollify progressives, particularly young progressives, who as workers, investors, may want to see corporations being more socially responsible? Are they using it as camouflage to say to politicians, you don't need to regulate us, we will regulate ourselves, we will be socially responsible? In other words, Why is it that directors' self-interest might consistently align themselves with shareholder self-interest? Well, claims that executives have become socially responsible. We hear it said here in the United States sometimes that there's woke capitalism, that CEOs have all become sort of progressive social justice warriors. Is the evidence supporting that? And the answer to that is no. My friend, Harvard Law professor Lucian Bebchuk, did a study of 100 public corporation acquisitions that were valued at $1 million or more and took place during the recent pandemic. Now, you would think if there was ever a time when corporate executives would care about employees, for example, communities, for example, you would think that it was during the middle of a global pandemic. And you would think that maybe those CEOs would have contractual protections and merger agreements that look out for the interests of those stakeholders. But in not a single case did Bebchuk and his co-authors find any such protections. Another study looked at firms whose CEO had signed that 2019 Business Roundtable statement. And it asks, how do those firms compare on issues like regulatory compliance to the firms whose CEOs didn't sign it? And the striking thing is that firms of the CEOs who signed that statement and said, we're going to be socially responsible, had a higher interest of regulatory compliance violations, which basically means they were less socially responsible than the firms whose CEOs declined to sign that statement. Back to my friend Lucian Bebchuk. He also looked at the firms whose CEOs had signed the 2019 Business Roundtable statement. Now, in the United States, it's typical for corporations to have somewhere on their website a statement of corporate governance principles. And historically, those statements have had some rather mushy commitments about the environment and society and so forth. But those statements have basically said, look, our purpose is to make money for our shareholders. They gussy it up, they fancy it up, but that's essentially what the statements are about. Well, you would think that if we were to take this 2019 statement seriously and believe that corporate executives have suddenly become social justice warriors, that we would see changes in these corporate governance guidelines by which these corporations would be embracing stakeholder capitalism. And the answer is that we simply are not seeing that. None of the firms whose CEOs signed the statement have changed their corporate governance guidelines to embrace ESG. Not one. So what's going on? What is that explaining, on the one hand, the embrace rhetorically by CEOs of ESG and stakeholder capitalism, and them actually not coming through with it when push comes to shove? As we say in the United States, they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. Well, it's a phenomenon that I think has become very familiar to us all, which is greenwashing. Greenwashing means doing things that give you the appearance of being environmentally friendly, socially friendly, and so forth, while still basically being capitalist. And this is the point, that stakeholder capitalism is basically, at this point, illusory. And there are good reasons for that. And the good reasons for that are that directors and managers have strong incentives when push comes to shove to favor the shareholders. Not always, but often. Because think about it. The environment and the employees don't elect directors. Shareholders do. Compensation, in the United States at least, we have what's known as say on pay. Director and executive compensation is voted on by the shareholders, not by the employees, certainly not by the environment. And if pay is what motivates people, and there's a lot of good evidence to suggest that it is, that's going to align director and manager interests with those of shareholders. Their compensation, in fact, in the United States, is heavily linked to share performance. If the stock price doesn't go up, director and executive pay doesn't go up. Directors and managers have fiduciary duties, but as long as the company is solvent, they owe those fiduciary duties only to shareholders. And only shareholders can sue directors for conduct that they claim injures their interests. And that's, again, they owe fiduciary duties only to the shareholders. So the bottom line of my three basic points is this. First off, stakeholder capitalism can't work. It's simply ask directors and managers to do things that they simply are not capable of doing. You can't simultaneously maximize 79 factors. Secondly, stakeholder capitalism would encourage directors to align themselves with whatever stakeholder group happens to be in their self-interest. It would reduce director accountability. Thirdly, however, when push comes to shove and the directors are forced to choose, the present system strongly incentivizes them to side with shareholders. And that would be true even if we embrace stakeholder capitalism. In order for you to say, okay, we're going to have stakeholder capitalism as the goal of the corporation, and directors are actually going to do this, you would have to change all of these rules about elections, fiduciary duties, compensation. And until that day comes, directors will continue to have an interest to side with the shareholders when it really matters. So, thank you very much. I hope you have a great conference, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your proceedings. Thank you very much.